And we'll pull in Isabella, who is in the Microsoft Teams team, and I'm hoping that she is there as I add her in on the screen. Let's try that.
Yep, she's there.
Hi, Isabella.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can. That's great. So, do you want to introduce yourself to the peeps that are listening?
The people we can't see, absolutely. Would love to.
Yeah, that's right. The mysterious...
Good morning.
Yeah. So what do you do at Microsoft, Isabella?
I'm a senior PM manager on the Microsoft Teams platform team. My team focuses on two areas of Teams platform: dev lifecycle, which is all of the developer tooling to onboard, get started building, testing, and then publishing out applications, and then the experiences for admins to manage and configure the apps that developers publish.
And so, what have you been focused on? What's been your big announcements for Build?
So platform in general has a bunch of stuff: activity feed, SSO, RSC, the ability to pop out apps into their own separate tab. My team is really excited about two specific areas: the Visual Studio and Visual Studio Code extensions that help developers get started building out apps, and then some work to help enterprise developers submit their apps to their IT admins for approval.
So there's big news, and I mean, we've been working with the tooling for a while now. So Nikola, do you want to share your screen, and we can have a look at what you've been doing to get this to work? Because right now we have a Registered Azure AD app, we have a React app that's working, kind of listing the meetings and essentially being able to go in and split those groups up and send the messages, but it's all within a browser. And so let's use the tooling, I guess, to work out how we can plug that React app directly into a Teams tab.
Right. Well, before we get to that, I just want to point out one thing is I got this to work. And the issue here for the extension was that the ID was misspelled or something. So I just got the ID again and it worked. So I don't know why it was that way.
I wonder
just
if
want to point it out.
A space in there or something.
Maybe when I copied it over from
Skype. Yeah, it could be a copy and paste in Skype. That's fair.
Exactly. Yeah.
Well, I'm glad that worked. Phew.
Yeah. You can see the breakout information that we store in here. That's the breakout info. Anyway, back onto Teams now. So like you said, we want to make this into a Teams tab. So the best way to actually do this, before the Teams extensions, what we did, because that's how you used to do it. If you go to Teams, there was the App Studio, right? You go to App Studio on Teams, you go to your manifest editor, and then you create a new application here, and then you just fill out this information for your application, and that's how you actually create a Teams application. Now what we have is this Teams extension that got announced, and in this project, you can see this is the project that I'm in right now, we have this option to import an app package. So I can either create a new Teams app, and this is going to scaffold a new app that has everything in it and has the manifest, and I can edit the manifest. Or if I already have an existing app, I can import an existing package, which I've already downloaded from App Studio on Teams. And this is going to import it. And if I go back here, it's going to create this publish folder for me. It's going to import that zip file, that package. It's going to create a manifest for me. It's going to create this development.env file and a bunch of the images. The cool thing about this, if I open up the manifest here, now you'll see it kind of replace some of the values with placeholders. So if I go to my development.env, you see here's where those placeholders kind of get fed through. And the coolest part that I actually really like about this is if I change this to something and I save, you can see here it says updated publish package development. So on save, it automatically updates the zip file for me so that I can publish this directly to Teams when I'm ready, or I can run it directly from here, which is really, really cool. But I don't have to actually edit things from this file. I can go directly into the edit app package, and I can edit the package for Teams directly within Visual Studio Code or That's Visual Studio cool. with wherever you are. So you can see here, I already kind of filled this out, and a bunch of descriptions and a bunch of images. The cool thing here is we want to make this into a tab. So I added a personal tab. So you just click add, and then if I edit this, I just pointed basically to the same URL that we have. And this is running on ngrok on my machine. Please, 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 please do not go to this ngrok. You can see the ngrok running in the background here.
He means it too. We don't want to ruin this whole show. So Isabella, what's the tool's like brand new? Like, I mean, it was shipped literally yesterday, right? What
shipped on Tuesday, exactly.
And I know we've been working with you through this the last few weeks, and I know you've got a bunch of other people giving you feedback. What other things does this support right now? I already seen the chat. We've got Alan in there that's been working with us, and he's saying like Visual Studio 2019, I don't even know how you say that now, Visual Studio Pro is coming soon, but it's out for Visual Studio Code right now.
Yeah, exactly. And so to start, it's the main focus is really how do we help developers onboard quickly? How do we help them decide which capabilities they want and then get the scaffold that they need to get started building out their app? Because I think, and Nikola, I love that you showed App Studio. I think one of the things that App Studio does really, really well is the manifest editing. But you kind of lost sight when you're in when you're in App Studio of everything else that goes into that app, right? Like all of the different services that you're calling. How do you get ngrok set up? And so I think one of the big challenges that we wanted to help address for developers is when you're onboarding, when you're building out that first app, how do we get you from here's all of this technical documentation to having an app that's up and running and actually integrates all of these different services that you need into a single app package. So the first focus for the extensions is really building out that scaffolding of the app that you need, being able to do all of the manifest editing that you need. This is the edit app package. Validation of the app. So if you're publishing your app to the global app store, there are a couple of different scenarios that we're going to test your app against. And we wanted to make sure that we brought that forward so that those of you who are looking to publish your app to the store, want to make sure that it's robust before you start that validation process, can pre-check your app against a couple of the different scenarios that we're going to be running against. And then, as Nikola pointed out, it's not just building out the scaffolding. We do support importing an existing package so that you can use these tools for apps that you've built out elsewhere. And one of the features that there are two features that we're really excited about that didn't ship in this preview but are coming soon. One is that you'll be able to hit run, and if you have sideloading enabled, that app is just you'll be able to install it directly within the Teams client. So there's a cool video of this that we show in the 100 ABC section. But like just the ability to just hit run and have that app immediately launch into Teams so you can test it out. It's
so you
just
don't have
awesome.
to go into the app thing, upload the zip file, and go through that whole round trip. That's cool.
Exactly. And so then you can make changes to your code. It'll know which package it is, so it'll start working. So
because that's always been
really
a
awesome.
challenge, I think. Whether you're building for any of our Microsoft products, like embedding it inside of the product, or even external, not our Microsoft stuff, is that round tripping of like deploying something so it shows up in whatever client you're building for. So that's great that you're doing that. That's awesome.
Yeah, like how talking to our developers, how they test things out has been such a pain point. And I think that's true not just in Teams, but in other workloads as well. We really just wanted to make that simpler. So we're excited for that. And then the other bit that we haven't released yet is that custom, that we call it a staging API, so that if you're an enterprise developer and you've built out an app and you want it to be made available to everyone in your organization, from this extension, you'll be able to submit that app to your IT admin, and then they'll be able to look at it, approve it, and then give everyone in your organization permissions to use it. So we're trying to make that deployment process a lot more streamlined as well for enterprise developers.
And then Tech Watching was saying, is the sideloading capability available with Azure Pipeline? So obviously, I think the way you're doing that is with a special build of Teams right now. But like, is there going to be like an API way to push a package into an environment?
We get that question all the time. I think it's come up in every single live session.
It's like a shot. It's like shot, drink.
We don't have an API yet. We'd love to hear the feedback about where and why it needs to be supported. The API that we're building out is one that gets your app to your IT admin. The reason we don't have an API yet is that there's some concerns about just like elevation of permissions, where an app could take that API and then sideload an API that has greater permissions. But we'd love to hear how and where and why you'd be using that to make sure that, we can consider it in the future for sure.
That's cool.
And I think what we're excited about is just to see how all of you use these extensions and what the features are that you use the most and which scenarios are most important, so that we can go in and make sure that, general release, the next upcoming releases really nail it on those scenarios that you're using the most.
And so, Nikola, we've got the app validated with a few niggly warnings, but that's because domains. So what's the next step?
You can't use a tunneling domain in your production application, which it kind of makes sense. But anyway, so now that I have the zip, I'm going to upload this directly into, see, I'm back in my moderator in the publish folder here. You can see it, publish folder. I'm going to take that development.zip file and just going to upload it directly into Teams. Unfortunately, I don't have that awesome feature where I can just run it directly from within Visual Studio Code, and I can't wait for that, to be honest, because it's going to make things so much easier. But for now, I'll just do the manual step of uploading it, and here's the app now. And if I add this to my application, you'll see this app is now running in my in Teams. Couple things here though. So I'll show you one thing that this is broken about this and we're going to fix, which is authentication. You can see authentication now works. I'm authenticated and I'm actually running directly inside of Teams. But if I actually sign out, I'm going to try to sign out. It's going to throw an error because it tries to redirect me to sign out. And now if I try to sign in, it's not going to be able to sign me in because I'm still using MSL.js. I'm trying to redirect, and that's not supported in Teams, right? So you do have to use the Microsoft Teams library to handle the OAuth authentication, which is to pop up the Microsoft Teams pop-up, do the redirects there, and then return back to the application. So to do that, we actually have a provider in the toolkit that does that for us. So I'm going to show that really quick.
So Nikola, Paul Schaefer made a good point. We're not making it sound like you got to do a zip upload every time you make a code change, because the zip is essentially the manifest file of config. So like right now you're going to make code changes. That won't mean you have to go republish the zip and go through that process again. So that's a fair point too.
That's a very good point. Yeah, exactly. Because the code just is served on a web server, right? It's not shipped with my manifest.
Yeah.
But anyway, so here this is the same code that Bet wrote like an hour ago, which is just using the MSL provider. Instead of using the MSL provider, I'm just going to add a Teams provider here. So I'm going to new up a Teams provider, and I'm going to do the same thing I'm doing here. I'm going to pass in a client ID, the scopes that we're using. And instead of a redirect URI, I'm going to set what we call the auth pop-up URL. And this is just the path to my web app where I'm doing all the authentication. I'm just going to call it Teams auth right now. And this is just when the pop-up opens up from Teams, it's going to go to my web app /Teams auth, and that's where I'm going to handle that auth. And then now I'm having two different providers. So I'll do a couple of things. First, I'll check to make sure I'm running in Teams. So I'm going to do Teams provider dot is available. And if it is, I'm going to use the Teams provider. Otherwise, I'm going to use the MSL provider. So that way, the exact same application is going to run in both Teams and just the web. I do need to tell Teams provider where the Microsoft Teams SDK is. So I'm going to import the Microsoft Teams SDK, which I've already installed with npm. So as Microsoft Teams from Microsoft Teams SDK. Okay. I'll just tell the Teams provider where that is. And the reason why I'm doing this is because we don't want to ship the Teams SDK as part of the toolkit because we want you to use different versions. So this way you just tell us where the Teams SDK is that you're using, and then we'll handle the rest from it. So now that I've already set this up, I need to make sure that I have this at team auth, and I'm just going to do a little magic here.
Cecil was commenting saying, this almost looks like C#.
Well, it is TypeScript, created by the same person. Yeah. So here what I'm doing is where I'm going to /Teams auth, instead of loading the app component, I'm going to load this Teams auth component instead. And if I look at what's inside of it, it's nothing right now. It just says now signing you in. So if I go to moderator.ngrok.io/Teams auth, it will just say now signing in. I do need to handle the authentication here. So I'm just going to do this very complicated work of just calling this method to handle auth. And then we do all the magic there to handle the auth and that. And that's it. So now if I go back here, and if I click sign in, it's going to open up the pop-up, says now signing you in, it's going to sign me in, and then voila, I'm signing to Teams with my account.
That's really
cool.
I
can do exactly what I've been kind of doing before. And I think I have about a few more minutes. I want to show you one last thing.
Yeah, I want to stop you there too, Nikola, quickly.
Yeah.
So Isabella, I had a question like lined up for this, and Tech Watching's asked the question, which is perfect. Is SSO, like there was a pop-up there. Is there a way that this can just be all silent so that, you know, a user wouldn't have to see a pop-up if they wanted to have like, Nikola's clearly signed into Teams here right now. Like, why is it popping up and signing in again?
We do actually. We just announced at Ignite that at Build Ignite. They're all the same conference. No, we just announced that we're supporting SSO for tabs. That's coming in shortly. But in the it's in preview right now, and it'll be GA shortly. And so in the extensions, when you start from the scaffold from start, you will be able to select an option that lets you set up SSO for your tab. And then Boss will come in shortly, so that you can configure it so that you can bypass that pop-up entirely.
That's awesome.
And that's been, a pretty significant pain point. We're excited to have that going out. It's been a long time with working with identity. So yeah, I think it'll be a big difference.
Okay, Nikola, onwards.
Yeah. And I think the question also is whether the Teams provider will support that tab SSO, which is something we really want to do. The difference between the tab SSO, that requires backend authentication as well to kind of swap the tokens on your backend. So it would require to have kind of like .NET backend to do that. We support that today with the proxy provider, but I'm sure there's a better way to do it. So we kind of want to hear from the developers of exactly how they want to see us kind of make that happen. Kind of working with the Teams team to do that. Anyway, moving on to the last thing I want to show for Teams, which is using the Microsoft Teams SDK to actually get contextual information about where the tab is running. So for example, if I go to my chats for that meeting, the hand washing meeting that I have here, I can actually add this application as a tab to this meeting. So I can go to Manage Apps, and I can add this app that I just installed to chat here. And there's the hand washing chat. I can set up tab. And this is going to actually open up a pop-up to configure this tab to be able to kind of install it. And you can see here, it doesn't really do anything. It's looking for this event. So I actually do the mapping between the chat and the event. So it shows directly the information about that event and moderation of that event instead of showing me the list of events. So let's actually add that code really quick. The way I've kind of configured this, if I go back to the toolkit here, and if I'm added this, if I go back to tabs, let me close this. There's this team tab configuration. And what you do is you simply point it to a configuration URL. And right now we just simply point it to Teams config. And I've set this to only support group chat. So instead of, you can also support Teams channels as well to kind of run it as a tab there. So I'm going to now complete this Teams config to be able to save that tab as a group chat. If I go back to Teams auth, if I go to the Teams config page, which is here, tab config, close that. Right now it's just setting up moderator and it's looking for event. I can actually now do that search to find that event in the graph and kind of do that mapping between the two. And to do this, I can use the Microsoft Teams SDK to kind of get the context of where the tab is running. So adding the Microsoft Teams SDK again here, and I can call a function on this called get context. So Microsoft Teams get context, and this is just going to return a callback where I can use that context. So now if I look at what's in context, I can see this context has the chat ID where the tab is getting installed. If it's on a channel, what's the channel name or the channel ID? And I can get all kinds of different things and get the context about where this tab is running. Right now, I just need the chat ID. So I'll get the chat ID and I'll get the events. So the events are just calling the graph. Let me add this asynchronous. So if you look at the events, this is just calling the graph, just like you did, like you showed about a few minutes ago, just calling the Me Calendar view to get a list of all those different events. And then I am going to filter those events with that chat ID just to get the event that has that chat ID. And then if I found one, I can set the validity of the config page. So for example, if there is now an event that has that chat ID, I can set the settings on Microsoft Teams settings to load this URL, so my URL /event/the ID of the event. So now when I click the moderator tab every time, it will go directly to that event instead of going to the homepage.
Cool.
And then I'm
so
simply telling, Right. And then I'm telling teams that now it's valid for the user to click save. So now the user can click save and then save that tab. So if I save this, go back here, hopefully this will refresh. You can see here, found that event hand washing. I can now save, and it's going to add that tab for me.
And so Isabella, with the SDK,
there it
is that essentially like all of the communication between what's in the iframe into the Teams environment? There's all these different functions you can use within that SDK.
The client SDK, yes.
Yeah. What other things can you do other than like that? Kind of got the context, but is there other things that you see commonly being used in the SDK?
Oh, that's a great question. And actually, I wish that we had Alan here, because Alan is in the chat right now, but is one of the engineers who works on the tabs area, so can talk about some of the most commonly used functionality. I will sidebar him and ask him for the top hit list.
Okay.
Yeah, and this is, I'm just going to point to a documentation here. You can see all the different things you can do with the SDK here too.
And is there like write stuff in there as well, Nikola? You can kind of do a bit. Oh, I see. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a huge amount of functionality available there.
Okay.
Yeah. Like one of the things that I didn't know you could do here too is also you can get the theme of the UI of Teams. So if the user has selected dark theme, for example, you can get that information, and then you can flip your UI to also be dark theme as well. So you're gonna kind of get stuff like that. Yeah, it is really, so you can make it look really like the Teams, like it's part of Teams.
Fancy.
Alan's here, he says.
Alan says the most common scenario is absolutely getting context.
Yeah.
But I think that the sky is the limit, really, and we've seen some really, really awesome things come out of how people are integrating into Teams. So definitely just kind of explore what you have and where you want to go, and then there's probably a solution for you there. And if there isn't, we want to hear from you.
I'm guessing, like, if you're using Teams on your phone or tablet or something, not just the desktop, you probably want to have that context for certain things too, right? You might want to hide functionality. Again, that's a context-related thing for sure.
And bringing in, our mobile app support story on Teams Mobile has been a lot. It's lagged behind desktop for a while, and the team has done an amazing amount of work to start bringing in support for more app scenarios on mobile. So you'll see us working more there in the upcoming months.
And Paul Schaeffler mentioned that the context of and set get entity ID is by far the most used in the product that he builds out there in the wild. So there you go, confirms it.
And I also want to point out, we also use the authentication stuff quite a bit in the toolkit. So the Teams provider uses authentication to pop up the pop-up and notify the other side when things are signed in.
So there's actually a good question here from Color Adamax 2. I love all these Twitch names. You have no idea who they are. Is there limitations or considerations when dealing with AAD guests? The quick draw answer to that would certainly be guests, yes. Because they're not a user as part of your Azure AD tenant, there's always going to be some kind of like edge case that the product won't work for. But in general, Isabella, like, is there things from a Teams perspective that they probably have to do from a consideration with say there was a guest that was invited to this hand washing event, I'm guessing with our flow, maybe not, but are there things that you can think of that would come up?
There actually are, and This is actually something that's come up more and more recently, just because we've seen the usage of apps grow across the board. As kind of in the past couple of months, the usage of Teams has been skyrocketing. The admins have policies that help them govern, which users see which apps, which users have permissions to use which apps. By default, guests should be seeing the default policy, so they just see the bare minimum of what's allowed. And there's currently, I think there's a bug that we're chasing down right now where certain guests actually don't even see the custom app. So be really, really, go through the technical documentation. We'll keep that up to date as we do the fix, but absolutely be very aware that there are always limitations about what guests can and cannot do.
We're experiencing that this week, right, with Build. Like there was some focus groups we were doing where the guests couldn't like a comment in the chat.
Exactly.
And so there's things like that you just have to be careful of. My recommendation, and some of the partners that I work with, like more as a white glove service, has been, add guests into your developer tenants and actually run through your application as the guest to make sure that you're kind of seeing those things. And this isn't just a team specific thing. You know, there are certain edge cases for groups in general in Microsoft 365 where users don't have the same first class citizen experience that a true AAD user of a tenant would get.
And I know it always seems hard. It definitely seemed hard for me at various times. And it really comes from that traditional admin perspective of, it's just harder to track what things are happening. And so sometimes you can have really destructive behavior happening. So that's where some of those restrictions come from. But we do keep our technical documentation up to date with where those different controls are and what guests can and cannot do. So definitely recommend you check that out.
That's cool. Okay, so Nikola, we've got it running. The context is there in the Teams tab. I think that was all we were going to show for that aspect of Teams, right?
Yeah, that's it. That's all of it.